Thanks very much, Donna, for the introduction. I'd like to thank the Organization of Chinese American Women for helping me set up this book launch. Also, thanks to the Patrick Henry Library for sponsoring this event. And there are some seats over here. Most of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out here on a busy Memorial weekend to celebrate my new book with me. I have copies here today, fresh off the press. And it is also available at Amazon and on my website, veronicalee.com. Today's event is also a celebration of my Chinese heritage, because the theme of the book is filial piety, a bedrock of Chinese culture. I know most Chinese cringe when they hear the filial piety word. Their parents use it to clap them on their heads and make them feel guilty about not doing enough. In the course of writing the book, I have discovered what filial piety is and isn't. Filial piety is not about what you cannot do for your parents and feeling bad about it. It's about what you can do for your parents and feeling good about it. Filial piety isn't about guilt. It's about love. A love that can turn the burden of caregiving into an uplifting experience. Okay, let me show you my book. Confucius Says. It's a novel about caring for aging parents and is based on my own experience. When my parents became too weak to live independently, I moved them from California to my home here in Vienna, Virginia. My 4 siblings in California had done their share in caregiving. I thought it was my turn to pay back. Let me show you a picture of my parents. My mom was 87, my dad was 88 then, and this picture was taken in my home. Aren't they a handsome couple? Yeah. Let me show you another picture of them.
Wow.
On their wedding day. This was taken in Chongqing, China in 1946. They met there as refugees during the Sino-Japanese War. So my parents were with me for 10 years. After they passed away, I wanted to write about the caregiving experience. My first draft was a memoir in my voice, but there was something very unsatisfying about it. First of all, because it was my memoir, my parents had no say in the story. It was just me talking about how difficult they were and what I had to do for them. Most caregiving stories are told from the caregiver's point of view. But what about the care receivers? They go through the ordeal just as much. Imagine being sick and helpless and dependent on others. That's not a good place to be. I needed to give my parents their say. I needed to understand what they were going through, because today I'm the caregiver, tomorrow I will be the care receiver. Another reason I wasn't happy about my first draft was that it was depressing. Aging and dying can be depressing. The only way I could make it readable was to bring in humor. I showed the draft to a fellow writer, and she said, "Why don't you turn it into a novel?" I decided to give it a try. I started by making up the characters. Each person has his own quirks. The mother is always spouting off Confucian sayings. Confucius says, you have to do this for your parents, you have to do that for your parents. And hence the title of the book, Confucius Says. The father is a sex maniac. He loves to watch porn movies, and he's always begging doctors to give him Viagra. He tells people, "My wife is a Confucianist. I'm just confused." The daughter, the caregiver, is a middle-aged Chinese American. She had a successful career as an office manager and has quit her job to become a piano teacher, something she's always wanted to do. She's in her late 40s, very confident, organized, and she thinks she can handle anything. The husband is a Caucasian American, an architect who travels a lot and therefore is able to tolerate his in-laws. He tries to be supportive of his wife, but he has no clue what Confucius is doing to his home. There's one more character, the dog. It's a Shar-Pei, you know, the kind with the face all smashed in and wrinkles everywhere. It's also a Chinese breed, so it has a lot to say about filial piety. Once these characters are in place, I felt free to do anything I wanted with them. I delved into their innermost thoughts and feelings, and I can laugh at them. I laugh at the parents who want the impossible from their children. I laugh at the daughter who thinks she knows everything. But most importantly, I can experience the caregiving process from everyone's perspective, including the dogs. Now let me talk about Confucius' role in this story. First of all, I have to say I am no expert in Confucianism. I only read a few books about it. But I feel I have the right to talk about Confucianism because Confucius says, practice comes before the preaching. Only then does the preaching follow. I feel I have practiced the Confucian virtue of filial piety, and therefore I can preach about it. And let me give you some background. Confucius lived about 2,500 years ago. He was a thinker and a teacher, and his teachings became the foundation of Chinese culture. They had also spread to other Asian countries such as Korea, Japan, and throughout Southeast Asia. Confucius lived during a time when China was divided into a number of states. He traveled from state to state, offering his ideas to rulers, but they didn't want to listen to him. Disappointed, he went home and opened a school. He was reputed to have taught 3,000 students, and some of them became major political actors. Confucius' greatest contribution to Chinese culture was the creation of an ethical system that celebrates the dignity of man. He believed man is basically good, but his goodness needs to be cultivated through education and following the way. The way lies in the practice of ren, which is compassion, kindness, and yi, which is righteousness, doing what is right and just. And these values are universal. We may have different names for them now, like love, integrity, morality, and so on. Confucius believed society can be classified into 5 relationships: between ruler and minister, father and son, husband and wife, older brother and younger brother, and friend. Each role comes with a set of duties, and if everybody performs his duties, then the world will be at peace. There will be harmony. Of all these relationships, he placed greatest premium on the one between father and son, which he regards as the model for all other relationships. And that is why Chinese culture places so much value on filial piety. The Chinese word for filial piety is xiao. Let me show you the character xiao. The top part means old. The bottom part means son. So this is a picture of the son carrying the parent on his back. Of course, Chinese are not the only people who practice xiao. I've met Americans of all stripes who do as much for their parents as I did, or even more. Loving your parents is a natural instinct, but the Chinese are probably the only people who make such a big deal of it. We write about it, tell stories about it, and we have written rules on how to serve our parents. In fact, we've turned it into a kind of religion. Now, let me tell you my story about practicing Shao. Although I grew up in Hong Kong, I have never read the Confucian classics. Chinese of my generation think of Confucius as passé. When I decided to move my parents in, I didn't think I was practicing Shao. I was doing it out of love for them and a sense of fairness. My parents took care of me once upon a time, and now I want to take care of them. When a friend heard my parents were coming to live with me, he said, "Oh, you're so Chinese." I was a bit offended. Like other immigrants, I try very hard to be mainstream. I don't want to stand out as different. Then after 8 years of taking care of my parents, I realized how horribly Chinese I was. I was 50-some years old, but I still couldn't separate myself from my parents. When my parents were happy, I was happy. When they were miserable, which was most of the time, I was miserable. At that time, my parents had declined to a new low. My mom almost burned down the house. Fortunately, I was home to turn off the stove. And both of them, my mom and dad, kept forgetting to turn off the water. They would turn on the water and walk away to do something else. And then when the water spilled over, they were too deaf to hear it. I shouldn't laugh because I'm going to get there myself. Also, my mom was always falling. It was just a matter of time that she had a big fall and really hurt herself. I was already hiring somebody to babysit them when I was away, but that wasn't enough anymore. I thought of hiring a live-in, but my husband thought it would be too much. We lived in a small house built in the 70s, nothing like the mansions of today. If a helper were to come and live with us, it would be like turning our home into a nursing home. My husband had sacrificed enough for my parents. I could not ask him to do more. I had a conference call with my siblings, but none of us could give the old folks the kind of care they needed, so we decided a nursing home was the only option. Rationally, I knew my parents had to move. My home was no longer the right place for them. But emotionally, I could not handle it. I knew I should be shopping for a nursing home in the area, but I couldn't do a thing. I was paralyzed. There was a stone wall in front of me, and I couldn't see past it. I knew I needed help. I went to see a therapist. I went 3 times, an hour each time. So altogether for 3 hours, I talked and talked about what I was going through. For 3 whole hours, I listened to myself talk. Then suddenly, bling, a light bulb came on. I realized what my problem was. It was a bedtime story told to me when I was a child. This is how the story goes. Once upon a time, in a village in China, a little boy lived with his mother. They were very poor, and one year there was famine in the country. The mother got sick, and the boy was worried that the mother would die if she didn't get some nutrition. The best nutrition was meat, but where could he find meat? An idea came to him. He went into the kitchen, took out the big butcher knife, and cut a slice of flesh off his thigh. He boiled it and served it to his mother. It's so good," she said. "Where did you get the meat from?" The boy was quiet and shaking. The mother knew something was wrong. "Come here, sit next to me." The boy did as told. The mother put her hand on the boy's lap. "Aya!" he cried. And that was how the mother discovered what he had done. I loved this story when I was a kid. I wanted to be that little boy. I wanted to cut a piece of flesh for my parents. The boy was a saint, and I wanted to be just like him. In other religions, saints are people who have dedicated their lives to God. In the Chinese religion, a saint is somebody who sacrifices everything to serve his parents. The story of the little boy is only one of many. Anyway, once I dug out what was buried deep down in my psyche, I understood what was going on. I wanted to give my parents a piece of my flesh. I wanted to keep my parents in my home, no matter what it took. Even if my husband were to leave me, even if I were to get sick from the stress. My therapist asked me a simple question. If you got sick, who will take care of your parents? The answer was obvious. I have to take care of myself before I can take care of anyone else. It's just common sense. But to me, realizing this was a major breakthrough. The stone wall in front of me collapsed, and I could begin to move forward. At this point, I have to mention two wonderful organizations that helped me through this period. One is called Area Agency on Aging. It's a nonprofit. Its services are free, and they have branches all over the country. The agency helped me find the right home for my parents. Without them, I wouldn't have known where to start. The second group I'm most grateful to is hospice. Hospice nurses and social workers held my hand, my siblings' hands, and my parents' hands up till the very end. They helped us make the right decisions, and they made sure my parents were comfortable. They did not suffer at the end. Now, let me get back to the writing part. I talked to my publisher, who thought my book proposal was a good idea. But he also said I had to make it different from all the other caregiving stories out there. He recommended several books on Confucius so I can bring out the Chinese angle. And I found some more books on my own. One of them is called The Classic on Filial Piety. This contains the original Confucian sayings on the subject. He didn't write it himself. His students recorded his words. I opened to the first chapter. A disciple asked Confucius, "What is filial piety?" Confucius' answer was, "Our body, skin, and hair are all received from our parents. We dare not injure them. This is the first priority in filial duty." I was shocked. All these years I thought I was supposed to give my parents a piece of my flesh. And now Confucius tells me I can't even sacrifice my hair for my parents. I read on and found more surprises. Aside from not hurting ourselves, Confucius mentioned other ways to serve our parents. Be a good person and establish a good name for myself. My glory is my parents' glory. In other words, every good deed I do, every achievement I make is an act of filial piety. Confucius also says, loving and serving our parents is just the beginning. We have to extend this love and service to society. That is how we establish our moral character. All this time, I thought filial piety was hovering over my parents, waiting on them hand and foot. Now Confucius tells me filial piety is to build a better world and to become a better person. How did I get it so wrong? I have to blame it on the people who twisted Confucius' words to serve their own purpose, and there were plenty of them in the last 2,000 years. They say, Confucius says, give your parents everything they want. Guess who made that up? The parents. If I had read Confucius before I took in my parents, it would have saved me a lot of grief. But now that I've done it, I feel very good about it. Life is a cycle, and it feels good to complete the circle with my parents. They took care of me, and I returned the favor. There were times I felt like abandoning them in a parking lot, but I'm glad I didn't. Parents can be a pain when they're alive, but when they're gone, that's when you realize how much you love them. To all the people who have aging parents, I'll say this. Take care of your parents. It's good for your soul, but do it wisely without hurting yourself and the people in your life. Of course, everyone has his own circumstances. We can only do what we can, so we will have no regrets later on. To aging parents, and I'm talking about myself, I will say, don't call on your children unless you have to. But if you really need help, ask for it. Give your children the privilege of serving you. And be really nice to them and thank them for every little thing they do for you. Then they will want to do more. Thank you very much for listening and for coming to my party.